when I was vice president of marketing for Louis Vuitton in Japan. This was at the time when smartphones were coming out and the Japanese were already using emoji. And I said I wanted to make a Louis Vuitton emoji. And you can imagine, try to tell the CEO of Louis Vuitton that you want to make this animated character of Louis Vuitton on a phone. At first, they looked at me like I was crazy. Of course, they just didn't understand the market, but they trusted me. They allowed me to go out and do this because I was trying to reach the young female consumer. You know, sometimes this innovation can start in a local market.
You're listening to Retail Disrupted, a podcast that explores the latest industry developments and the trends that will shape how we shop in the future. I'm your host, Natalie Berg. On today's episode, we're diving into one of the biggest challenges facing global brands. How do you grow internationally without losing local relevance? Well, my guests today are two marketing leaders with truly global careers. And not only that, they've written an entire book about this topic. Katherine Melchior has spent more than 2 decades working across retail, luxury, and hospitality for brands like Nike, Nordstrom, Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Hyatt, and Shiseido. She has lived and worked across the US, Europe, and Japan. And today, Katherine lectures on international marketing and leadership at UC Berkeley in California. She's also guest lectured at a number of colleges and universities, including Stanford, Wharton, and Brown. Natalie Kelly is the Chief Marketing Officer at Zappi. She brings deep expertise in consumer insights, global marketing, and helping brands stay close to fast-changing customers across markets. She's a seasoned business leader, one of the top 10 CMOs on LinkedIn, and a longtime Harvard Business Review contributor on topics of global business and international marketing. Together, Katherine and Natalie have written the book, Brand Global, Adapt Local: How to Build Brand Value Across Cultures. We're going to hear all about this on today's episode. We're going to be discussing why one size fits all is no longer a viable strategy, what global leaders can learn from luxury retail, and how companies can strike the right balance between global consistency and local flexibility. We're also going to explore some real-world examples of global expansion done well and global expansion done not so well. So, without further ado, let's welcome our guests to the show and dive right in. Katherine and Natalie, welcome to the podcast. I'm really looking forward to our discussion and hearing all about your book. Let's start out with some intros. And Katherine, I'll come to you first. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background?
Absolutely, I'd love to. Well, I've spent more than 2 decades working in retail all over the world. I actually started in learning about retail in Japanese television, if you can believe it or not. I went straight to Tokyo after college and I joined a TV network. And after several years in Tokyo, I took an offer to move to New York and we started a TV show that was a high-end home shopping TV show before the internet existed.
Oh, wow.
So I discovered the joy of the bottom line in that if I could tell a good story and have really good products, then I could not only keep people entertained for the life of that segment, but I could see the bottom line of how much they bought. And that's what taught me how to market, first of all, to the Japanese, but ultimately, which is probably the hardest consumer to understand, and then ultimately to go into retail around the world. So when I left television, I ended up working for lots of brands that we know. I worked at Nike in the US, and Nordstrom then sent me to France. So I worked for Nordstrom when they bought a French brand, Façonnable, in the south of France. And I took my family there for 4 years. And then Louis Vuitton found me for a job in Paris. But when they understood I spoke Japanese, they sent me back to Tokyo. So I've been on this kind of yo-yo between the US, France, and Japan for many years. So that was the bulk of the retail specific section. And then I actually was realizing how much it's about experience when I was with LV. And I did a stint at Gucci for a period of time, but I finally left high-end goods and I went into high-end hospitality because I as I said, I was really passionate about the experience. And Hyatt asked me to come in and run the luxury brands. So I ran Park Hyatt and Grand Hyatt around the world. But that wasn't the end of the story. I actually then did two more industries because I went back to Japan a third time, which was for Shiseido. And I ran the luxury division of Shiseido and Clé de Peau Beauté, the two billion-dollar brands. And I finally went into tech, doing digital transformation for various companies. I decided that to be a marketer today, I had to get my own teeth uh, broken on in tech, and I went to Babbel, the online language learning app in Berlin. So I ended up in Berlin. And now I
Wow.
teach at Berkeley Haas Business School because of all those different experiences and industries. So I teach global marketing there.
Fascinating. I was going to say, you must have such a wealth of experience across not just different geographies, but different sectors as well. So
Yeah.
super interesting. Well, it's great to have you here. And Natalie, can you give us a little bit of an intro as well?
Sure. So Natalie Kelly, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Zappy. And we are a consumer insights platform, and we help a lot of brands that care a lot about their retail presence, a lot of fast moving consumer goods. We have about half of the Fortune 500 CPG brands as customers, and they use our software to test in an agile way and stay in touch with the market and where the market is headed. So I've worked in tech for most of my career as a marketer. Katherine landed there, as she had just mentioned. But my background started as a Spanish interpreter. So I actually come from a language background and moved into services and technology, and then made my way in kind of the opposite direction. Lived in Ecuador, lived in Ireland for several years, and worked and had my own agency a long time ago, working with a lot of consumer brands, particularly for the US Hispanic market, because they needed help understanding how do we build a brand that will resonate with people who speak Spanish in the United States, who speak English in the United States, but come from a different cultural background. And that was something that was near and dear to my heart as a Spanish translator and interpreter serving that community here in the United States.
It's so interesting. And it's just really great to have you both on. I mean, as a dual American British citizen, I've lived in the UK half my life, obviously from the US. And so I think by traveling and living in other places, you do get a very different perspective on different cultures, different, consuming consumer habits. So yeah, let's dive into it and let's talk about your book, because in your book, you argue that brands need cultural intelligence to stay relevant. And so I think that's a really good starting point. We all know that one size no longer fits all. And I think that's true across all of retail, not just when we're talking about international expansion and geographies. Um, Even though there's a general consensus today that you can't take a cookie cutter approach to expansion, it seems like this still happens. So, why is that? Why do so many global brands struggle to connect with local consumers?
It's interesting that you say most people would agree with that. And what we have found in talking to people is it's surprising how few organizations actually do that. So the ones who may know that that needs to happen, it's then another thing to actually be doing it. Because the data is that it's 75% or more consumers would rather work for brands that share their values, and they want to read about it in their own language. But two-thirds of the problems that come from global business are cultural. So businesses are still failing to do that. We may think that this is self-evident, but the reality is that it's not happening that way.
Yeah. Do you think there's an understanding though that they need to do that? It's just about actual implementation is harder than theory. Do you think that's the problem?
Well, yes. I mean, the theory is that it is something that we've developed in the book, but I don't necessarily know that everyone even agrees with it. And the theory is that you need to create one global brand with universal values, and then you need to adapt those values differently per culture. So certainly the application of that is really hard because you need to have people with that same understanding, both of the brand and the flexibility that's required at headquarters and in each of the regions.
I would just add, one of the jobs that I had working in tech was oversaw international operations and strategy at HubSpot, a large public tech company. And my job was to try to get all the local teams' viewpoints back into the HQ thinking. Was a big part of my job. And what I found was it was really hard to do that. Why? Because people have proximity bias. They're immersed in their home market and they're thinking about their home country the majority of the time. They hire great people in market, but often won't listen to them. And so the local teams are saying, hey, we need this resource or we want to do it this way. And a lot of the advice that we give in the book is on how to strike that sweet spot between local flex and global continuity. And Katherine has some beautiful frameworks that she introduces in the book around that. But what I found on the practitioner side, trying to deal with the operational layer, is that it's hard to get that into practice because a lot of times the business has a nexus of power in one country. And so they're not good at extending the power to the local teams who often feel like they're sidelined and like nobody can hear their voices. And a big part of my job was to amplify the local voices at HQ to make sure that they could be heard, not just the voice of the customer, but the voice of the local employees, because they often felt like they weren't being heard.
Yeah, and they're much closer to the customer, right? So their
Exactly.
voices do need to be heard.
Mhm.
That's really interesting. I wonder if we could dig a little bit deeper into this because I imagine it's not easy to get that balance right because on the one hand, yes, you need that global brand consistency and you also need the efficiencies that come with scale, which is maybe a whole other podcast. But on the other hand, you have to be relevant to your customers. At the end of the day, any retailer, any business has to be relevant to their customers. So that means understanding the local market and adapting where you need to. And I think from a retailer's perspective, when you enter a new market, there's so many decisions, or a brand. There's so many decisions you need to make around store formats, branding, assortment, pricing, promotions. Um, what would your advice be to these businesses? How can they strike that right balance?
So when I think of retailers that do this really well, I often think of Sephora. So Sephora is a great example of a company that does a great job with keeping a lot of global consistency, but also having local flex. And it's down to even, the product selection in store, even, the types of recommendations and what you see in the front will be different depending on local taste of local consumers. But one of the things that I noticed when I went to Sephora in France versus Germany versus, different countries is they're still also having a challenge with making sure that they have kind of a unified data layer because if I have points in one country, they're not going to transfer to the next, and the loyalty programs are not universally connected. So I think all of those retailers have to think not just about the offline experience, but the online experience, and connecting the two becomes really tricky. And that's something that I know retailers are having a challenge with because a lot of the data is collected locally and have, local needs. But I, as a global person, and I think anybody who lives in Europe and travels around probably would want to be able to have connectedness and a even more connected experience than they can get today.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Because I think as consumers, we expect that across different channels. And to your point, especially here in Europe, where it is so easy to, hop on a train and get the Eurostar to Paris from London, or you do expect a certain level of recognition and consistency in the experience.
It starts with leadership at headquarters. They have to absolutely find and work with and develop a relationship with the people in the regions. It starts with them because they're the ones that set the brand and they set what the framework that we talk a lot about in the book called freedom within a framework. What is the frame of the brand that remains fixed, and which aspects of it can their teams and do they want to encourage their teams to innovate with? And so we have examples here from different industries, from food. There are a lot of food examples because taste is very local. And the brands that really get that right can not only grow their business internationally, but actually thrive in certain markets that normally might be challenging with their domestic product. And retailers, and in retailers, there's all different kinds of examples of how much decision making you want at the headquarters versus how much you want in the retail. And personally, I've worked at Nike, I've worked at Louis Vuitton, Gucci, and I worked as a consultant with Tommy Hilfiger, and they have very different. While they're all strong brands, they have and Nordstrom. They have all very different approaches to that balance. But as Natalie Kelly was saying earlier, the key is really building that trust with those people. And so one example that I can share with you is when I was vice president of marketing for Louis Vuitton in Japan, I was an American. And so I wasn't French and I wasn't Japanese. And that was very important because prior to that, I had been with Nordstrom in a French brand. And while the French loved having me as an American because they thought I meant money bags, and I was going to do these huge advertising campaigns. But after a while, so they loved me, but they didn't trust me. And then as they started to trust me, the Americans, Nordstrom, started to think that I'd gone French on them. And so I was
very,
caught.
very Emily in Paris.
Yeah, I know. It absolutely is. And I was kind of caught between the two. So it was lovely to be in Japan for a French brand because I was Switzerland, if you will. I was kind of neither one nor
Definitely.
the other. And so this was at the time when actually smartphones were coming out and the Japanese were already using emoji. Emoji came from Japan. Emoji, it means emotional. G is for character in Japanese. So it's emotional character.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, right. So they were already using them in small other kinds of phones. And I said I wanted to make a Louis Vuitton emoji. And you can imagine when these were first coming out to try to tell the CEO of Louis Vuitton that you want to make this animated character of Louis Vuitton on a phone that's going to be, 2 centimeters, half a centimeter wide. Well, at first they looked at me like I was crazy, but it was the relationship and the trust that I had built with the headquarters. And of course, they just didn't understand the market, but they trusted me and they allowed me. I said, I'm going to make it beautiful and it's going to practically have a shine on it. They allowed me to go out and do this because I was trying to reach the young female consumer. And that's how they were communicating. And I had to be able to do that. It didn't mean we were going to do it in Paris or in New York. Eventually, yes, but sometimes this innovation can start in a local market, and we would not have been able to do it had it not been for my relationship with the C-suite in Paris.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Really, really interesting. And I don't normally like to name and shame on this podcast, but I think when it comes to international expansion, I think there are a lot of learnings from some of the failures. Now, I
Yeah,
immediately think of Walmart in Germany because they basically exported the US model without any real consideration of the local customer, like even down to putting greeters at the store entrance, which certainly works across the US, where you're expecting to be greeted with a smile and welcome to the store. But that's not going to work in Dusseldorf or Berlin, So I think that's a really classic case study of, how not to do international expansion. And just briefly, I'd also include Tesco in the US with their Fresh and Easy format, or most British retailers actually trying to crack the US market because they don't have a great track record. But again, I think that was another case of really not understanding the local customer and to your point about, who's running those operations and how well do they know the local customer. So I'd love to get your take now. Do you have any examples of brands that maybe misread a market and paid the price for it?
sure. We have lots of different examples, unfortunately. I mean, I think that you could say one of them is even Target, which is in Minneapolis, and they went into Canada. So you would think this is really close to them and they could learn for it, but they still didn't have the same kinds of products that the customer needed. And people didn't shop the same way. So even when you think that this is my neighbor, and many Canadians would come into their shops in Minneapolis to buy product, once they went into Canada, they were too focused on what they were doing in their domestic market to make it work. And they ended up pulling out. I mean, it's really kind of an amazing story. So there are lots of examples of brands in different markets, brands and retailers in different markets. We look at, everyone kind of wants to go into New York. And I say this because Printemps, you're talking about English retailers, but Printemps, the French one, just went in this summer. And we were asked about that. And I said, it didn't work very well for Galerie Lafayette many years ago. They tried it right in the same adjacent neighborhood, thinking that it would work really well. And this is even before the travel numbers to the United States plummeted. So, I think that retail is very tricky if it's a retailer that is like a department store with lots of different products. If it's a vertically integrated retail store, like a brand store, that's quite different because you control the entire experience, and you also control the supply and the product lines that you can choose to adapt to that market.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So you talked earlier about building trust with employees, and I think another important point here is around how you build trust with consumers. And I guess in some ways that's probably easier now because the world's so much more connected than it used to be with social media. I think there's general the recognition of brands from around the world is it's just so much easier to achieve that. But also as consumers, we have high expectations and we want transparency and authenticity. So trust isn't necessarily a given anymore. And so I guess my question to you, Natalie, I'll come to you for this. When a brand enters a new market where consumers don't know them yet, what can they do to really accelerate that trust and credibility?
Well, I'm a big fan of hitch your wagon to a star. Co-marketing and collaborations are often a good way to enter a new market. Partnerships, I've seen many times in the case of B2B, but it also works in the case of retail. As we were talking about some of the failures from British companies moving into the US, and everybody cracks me up because people are always like, oh, they're such similar markets. It'll be the same. And actually, I experienced much more culture shock like moving to Ireland than I did moving to Ecuador. So it's not always, you know, it's not the same. These are very different economies, different histories, different cultures. I've noticed in the US, there were Marks and Spencer's products around Christmas in Target. And I thought, oh, this is a brilliant way for people to experience a seasonal burst of, they get a seasonal burst of brand awareness at a time when people are, more inclined to purchase those types of products anyway that they sell, and it exposes them to the brand. You saw this with boots as well in Target and in some other retail locations. They didn't open up a Boots location like they have in the UK, but they did start bringing their brand in. And actually, they were viewed as more of a premium product when sold alongside a lot of the lower priced options in Target. And I thought that was very interesting because it's always interesting to me when a foreign brand comes in and they can use their panache and their foreign appeal to make a big splash and be seen as something slightly different and maybe command a higher price point and have an even higher margin in a new market. So I like that strategy a lot. I think it's an underutilized strategy and it can prevent a lot of failures by giving you a test to see if the market is going to work well. I know Caudalie, for example, they're a French skincare brand.
I'm
They
a
did
big
this.
fan.
I am too. They did this initially through luxury spa locations. And so they sold their products only in those, just a few luxury spas to see what they could learn about the American consumer and how that would translate, and they could learn back. And now they're sold in most Sephora locations. And so but that's been like a 10-year strategy. This takes time. It takes time to research the market, learn the market. But I think that's the smart way to do it. Small tests, co-marketing, lower risk, and then you can expand more broadly. And that helps, build a bigger brand over time.
Yeah, those are great points. And I know that, my mom comes out to visit us in London a couple times a year. And when she found some Marks and Spencer products in her local Target in Florida, I got so many photos. She was so excited. She was probably not the typical consumer because she was very aware of the brand, but it definitely creates this element of buzz, of excitement, and a little bit of FOMO, like, get it while it's here. So that's really interesting. Katherine, you've worked for some of the biggest luxury brands. You mentioned earlier Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Nordstrom. What can we learn from luxury retail when it comes to creating long-lasting value for the customer?
Love this. I love this question. Thank you for asking it, because luxury is an irrational purchase. We're not buying it for its value. It's an aspirational one, which means it's touching us psychologically. We talk about value propositions. You have to either find a new customer or deliver at least one of three different values uniquely: monetary, functional, and psychological, right? Functional, we all understand that things got to work. Monetary, price point, luxury obviously is not competing on that. and then it's psychological. And psychological is the one where you have the most room to play. What are you delivering, and how are you delivering? And the thing about luxury is that they have got to be absolutely of the highest integrity. And it's that integrity that I think travels through everything they do. You don't need to be to offering $5,000 handbags to have integrity. But it's that integrity that we can all learn from luxury, whether you're offering a $5 coffee or, again, a $5,000 handbag, because they put integrity into their product, into their service, into their experience, into their communication. So all aspects of the experience should reflect integrity. And so when I went into hospitality, I could share a lot of the learnings from retailer into hospitality. Like one of the things that retailers were terrible at in terms of events was making sure each and every single customer could be transported to where they needed to go. And so often they hire out to hotels, because hotels are very, very good at that service. But on the flip side, when you go into hotels, they're not very good at, say, amplifying something at social media, because they're just serving the person who's walked within their hotel. And one of the things that I brought was this notion of integrity in every piece of communication to reflect a luxury brand, particularly when you have a Hyatt, where you have a house of brands and you have a corporate office that is working for lots of different types of customers. And wanted our teams to really understand how everything that we do to the consumer should reflect the Park Hyatt or the Grand Hyatt brand. And even those two need to be different in terms of how we show up in the hotels, certainly, but how we would receive customers and how we communicate with those customers. And that's all based on the brand values.
Yeah. So being clear in those brand values and what they are, but also being consistent. I think that's probably based on what you've just said. I think that's really important and good lessons for all retailers and brands and businesses
Yeah,
more
be
generally.
consistent, but again, you have to then be flexible. So this is the contrast that brands have to deal with, right? So for a Park Hyatt, I'll give you an example. We identified what the brand really was all about. And it had three pillars. It was started by the Pritzkers, and it was a reflection of their personal, staying with their personal, in their personal home, because they had too many B2B customers coming and staying with them. So they bought a small boutique hotel, and they wanted it to just be a reflection of staying with them. So they wanted incredible food and wine, museum quality art, because the Pritzkers had been head of the Chicago Art Institute, and they wanted to treat people like they were friends and family. Well, what does that mean? It doesn't mean the same thing in Chicago, in downtown Chicago, as it does in Shanghai. So it's the same concept of wanting to treat people like their friends and family. But that means in Chicago, if someone is coming in for a business meeting, get them to their room quickly, take care of the credit card later. And if someone is in, say, Shanghai or Tokyo on a honeymoon, no, it means giving them a glass of champagne and talking to them about their visit, or heavens, get them into their hotel room and lock the door and let them have that bottle of champagne. So but in both cases, it's reflecting the same brand pillar. Just how that shows up differs in one culture to another.
Yeah. It's so interesting because when I hear what you're saying and I'm thinking about retail and the direction to travel and how I see this bifurcation in retail where you have functional and you have fun. And it's this kind of divergence between if it's functional, I want it to be as frictionless, as seamless as possible. I want checkout free. I just want to get in and get out. I want to find what I need on the shelf and be out as quickly as possible. If it's, you know, if it's a fun shopping experience, it needs to be experiential. It needs to be, engaging all the senses. It needs to be offering that tech-enabled human touch, that democratization of white glove service, that surprise and delight. So I do see this real bifurcation in retail as well. And I think being able to identify your customer in that need, for that need in that moment, not easy, but so important.
Yeah,
So
I have a great example on this, both in the US. Look at Uniqlo. And Uniqlo learned from grocery stores how to have people come in and just sort of swipe it's self-serve now. You come in, you get your items. Their items are in many ways commodities. That's kind of the idea that Mr. Yanai had for Uniqlo, right? Is that everyone can wear it and it's very predictable. Go in, choose what you want, easy to find, and self-swipe and get out of there. He learned that from grocery stores. So this
Yeah.
is how innovation can cross industries. Meanwhile, another American retailer, Apple. Apple learned about selling tech from luxury stores. How do we create an incredible experience in the design of the shop and the light of the shop and have everything very easy to access? I mean, everything looks like little jewels when you walk in, and the service is incredible, right? One person will come right in and help you and then ask you to wait or look over here. And it's an incredible immersive experience. So here are two examples of retail of two different kinds of products at different ends of the price point, but adapting their experience to what their product and their values is all about. Are all about.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe surprising some customers in the process. I mean, obviously, we're all familiar with the Apple experience now, but I think that element of surprise and delight is really important. And it actually you just sparked another thought, which is I think it was Sephora. I'm not 100% sure, but it was definitely a beauty retailer who this picture was sort of going viral a few years ago, where it was two different baskets. So one basket was like, I just want to shop, leave me alone, don't talk to me. And the other basket, and they were just color coded, like one was red and one was black. And the other color was like, I need help. I want inspiration. Please come and talk to me. And I love that. I just think that's a really simplified example, but such a great way of recognizing that people do have different needs. So, Natalie, if I can come to you, I love to do a little bit of future gazing on the podcast. And if we were to jump ahead to say 2030, I appreciate this is a tough question because we know there's so much uncertainty in the market right now. But what's the biggest challenge you think brands will face when it comes to global expansion?
I think it's keeping up with the pace of change. Consumers are changing so fast, and it's really hard depending on your supply chain and how agile you can be on the supply chain side to keep up. We're seeing more and more dupes come out faster than ever. We're seeing a lot of companies that have maybe a store brand that are now investing in brand building for their store brand. And these are lower cost alternatives to brands that, they're coming out with those products just as fast as, the leading brands that are on the shelves. And so I think the speed is going to continue to be a differentiator. So I would encourage people to think about that. How can we keep pace with the change and how can we stay as close to the consumer as possible so that we can implement that feedback quickly enough to be competitive? That is where I think things are headed. And in terms of globalization, with people being more and more connected, those ideas are moving across cultures faster than ever. And so a good idea over here might become the next big thing over there. So being able to take advantage of that and move on it fast enough is, I think, where things are headed and where real competitive advantage lies.
Yeah, it's just so important for brands to be agile today and to continue throwing ideas against the wall and testing and iterating and evolving. One final question, and I'd love both of your input on this. What advice do you have for the retailers and brands that are tuning in today? So, what's one thing they can do to improve their globalization strategy?
I would focus internally on how much your staff understands your brand and where their customer in these different markets or just different regions relate to that brand. So I would first reflect on making sure you have everything it takes internally before looking externally.
It's great advice.
Yeah, I would add, assume that there is more that you don't know than that you do know about another market. Go in with your eyes wide open, ask a lot of questions and be curious because likely there's less in common than you think with your domestic market and things that will be blind spots. Know going in, there will be blind spots and try to uncover those before you invest a lot of money because it's painful for myself and Katherine to see this happen over and over when all you really need to do is understand the market better, get closer to the consumer, listen to what they are saying, know what the local competitors are doing and why, and know that this market is not the same. And you are building a brand from scratch in a new market. It's pretty much like being a startup. You are a challenger brand in that market. So don't assume just because you have tremendous success and you're the market leader in one country that will apply when you move into a new market. Everybody talks about the halo effect. I think there's almost no halo effect when you're moving into a new market, because you do have to build a brand from square one.
Yeah. Yeah, you've got to prove yourself all over again. And that's probably even harder when, you have that established credibility in your home market, but you need to kind of swallow your pride and, make sure you're proving yourself to another consumer in a local market.
It's humbling. It's humbling.
It is.
Nobody
Absolutely.
likes to feel like we worked so hard to get here and now we have to start all over. Yes, you do. You really do. You have to be humble.
You have to put in the hard work.
Yeah.
I think I think you do have to put in the hard work. And I think it's also important to remember that you don't know the innovation that will come out of that market. You will, if you can do that right, I can almost guarantee you will discover innovation from that market that may have global application. So that's why it's so important to go in with your eyes open and see which aspects of your business can adapt similarly and which really need to be changed, and which new ideas may arise from that location.
Fantastic. Natalie and Katherine, it's been so great to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining me, and best of luck with the book.
Thank you, Natalie.
Natalie.
Thank you for listening to Retail Disrupted. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please leave a rating or review or share it with others. It really makes a difference.